This podcast was inspired by a few of my clients because the parallels of depositions and bad marriage counseling are going to be very apparent throughout this podcast. Very interesting topic. And it falls under depositions because if you think about it, what is a deposition of the plaintiff, the person who's bringing the case? The deposition is basically doing the same thing that the company did to the employee, which is basically to gaslight you, to say that all of the problems that were in this relationship, this employment relationship, were basically because of you. It's all on you. And we're going to take out various exhibits during this deposition. We're going to take out various things that you said totally out of context, and we're going to try to get you to admit, yeah, this was all your fault, while not laying a hand on the company. Now, what is the problem here in both of these instances? It's a double standard. In employment law, a double standard is essentially the essence of a discrimination or a retaliation case. Hey, I did the same thing as this other guy, yet you totally censured me for it. You disciplined me for it. But you didn't do anything to the other guy of a different race or nationality or gender or anything like that. Hey, my work performance was excellent and it wasn't recognized. This other person's work performance was maybe as good. This guy got all kinds of awards. What is the number one knock on bad marriage counseling? It's that the therapist was biased, favored one of the spouses over the other. And that was reflected in those sessions. What causes this double standard? Why does it exist in companies? Well, it exists because of favoritism. It exists because of close relationships between parties within the company. And unclose relationships or distant relationships between people of the same rank who are treated differently. I know of a number of situations, okay, and this has never ended well, where the marriage counselor sold the couple on being both one of the spouse's therapists and then at the same time serving as in a dual role as the couple's marriage counselor. And even though many psychologists would say this is a conflict of interest, this should be avoided at all costs, nonetheless, this marriage counselor sold the couple on this and said because we deal with issues such as sexuality or this or that, it's better that I know one of the spouses really, really well. Now, how do they get away with this? Well, how do companies get away with double standards? A lot of times, they get the employee to agree voluntarily to whatever was being done to them. I know now this sounds sick, but it does happen. Happens a lot with respect to demotions. Even though we're going to take away all your direct reports, we're going to give you no real responsibility. We're going to exclude you from high-level meetings. At the end of the day, this is going to free you up to do project X, Y, and Z, which we think is going to be good for you. And, oh, by the way, if you don't accept this, you're kind of fired. Okay, so what does the employee do? The employee, if the employee is smart, the employee has to accept this. The employee says, okay, yeah, I'll accept this new job, whatever, or these new conditions. Then at deposition, the employee is asked, hey, Mr. So-and-so, you're suing for demotion. You're suing for loss of direct reports. You're suing for your career being shortened or harassment. But wait a second, Mr. Employee, you agreed to this. You said you were going to do this. Now, of course, they don't put in writing that if you don't accept this, you're going to be fired. I mean, those are generally done by conversation, and good luck reporting that somewhere unless you're going to sue. Marriage counseling works the same way. Bad marriage counseling, that is. There are a lot of good ones out there, but there are bad ones. And how does that work? It works in conjunction with one of the spouses. One of the spouses, generally the one who is the beneficiary of the conflict of interest, will threaten the other spouse and will say to the other spouse, look, unless you accept so-and-so as both my therapist and our counselor, you will never have sex again. There will be very serious consequences to this marriage. Or some of them out and out say, I'm going to divorce you. Now look what happens. Now they go to the marriage counselor. Do you think the spouse who's been threatened has the power to say that to the marriage counselor? Of course not. The way the marriage counselor gets away with it, the bad one, is he or she will ask that spouse, now I know I treat your other spouse in therapy and I serve in this dual role. Are you, quote, and I love this word, are you comfortable with me serving in both of those roles? Obviously, the person has to say yes. The person even has to act as if he or she is comfortable with that arrangement. The question by the therapist should not be for that spouse. The question for the therapist really has to be for the other spouse. And the question has to be, Mr. or Miss Spouse, did you threaten your spouse if he or she did not accept me in both roles? But they don't ask that. What they're looking to do is they're looking to write in their notes, just like HR departments are looking to do. Had a discussion with so-and-so employee. Employee said, yes, I accept this. Marriage counselor, the bad one, does the same thing. Had a discussion with so-and-so spouse. Explain that I'm also the person's spouse's therapist and marriage counselor. Other spouse agreed, no problem. That's how companies get away with this, or try to. And we know that that double standard is going to manifest in many different ways. One of the things the company will do at your deposition, this happens every single deposition, they will take out some email that you wrote that was sharp. And they're going to say, wow, won't you agree, Mr. So-and-so, that that email was sharp and that you had a tone of rudeness to it when you said that, when you sent that to your supervisor? Okay. Was that one bad email out of 500? How many times, what percent are we talking about? Mr. So-and-so, exhibit number 5. Here, you made a mistake on whatever job you were doing. Okay. And how often did that happen? Is that 1 in 1,000, 1% of the time, 10% of the time? What do you think happens at bad marriage counseling? One of the spouses immediately takes some incident. Hey, we were eating dinner and you said, wow, that's a new picture. I hadn't noticed that before. But I told you about that picture a week ago. You don't listen to me. Okay, one picture out of how many times? Out of 100 times that the person did listen to the other spouse, what kind of efforts was that person making to listen to the other spouse? What was the error rate? Hey, you didn't make dinner for me that one night. Well, or the dinner you made really was bad. Okay, well, did the guy's wife typically do that and just miss it that once? Does that one error demonstrate that she really didn't care about the guy at all? Or is this somebody who's just upset? That's really the question that you have. And that is a very good parallel to an employment relationship and what you'll face at your deposition. It's okay to say at a deposition, that was a mistake. But I also did that same thing 700 times correctly. Here's another parallel. Well, Mr. So-and-so employee, you actually walked out of the meeting in the middle, and then you left and you went to the office, to your own office. You left in the middle and you went to your own office. Wow, that's really acting out. Mr. or Miss Spouse, you left one night and you slept in your office. Wow, that's really acting out. That's really bad behavior. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about why you did that. And then the whole focus of that marriage counseling session is about why that spouse did that. Okay, it's not, by the way, about what caused that. It's not about let's take a look at the behavior of everybody around that person. It's not about let's take a look at the partner. Let's take a look at what the spouse did to cause that. Was that rational? No, we don't look at that here. We're only looking at what you did. That's it. That is a way that both a human rights department and a bad marriage counselor act. That's what they do. No matter what that other employer did or what that other spouse did, it doesn't matter. That other spouse could have said the most mean thing in the world. Could have said, oh, you had suicide ideation? Well, I hope you do kill yourself. Doesn't matter. We don't look at that. We only look at what this person did. That's it. Another technique that happens at depositions, similar to very bad marriage counseling. This question of what did you hear? Okay, I love this one. The supervisor says this work product was good, but it would have been better if you used the word happy instead of glad. And they say, well, Mr. So-and-so, you or Miss So-and-so, you complained about that. That was in your hostile work environment claim, right? But let's take a look at that. What did you hear? All the supervisors did was make a suggestion. That's it. Okay, and you let's just look at that thing literally. It's the literal way to look at a statement. And therefore, you don't really have a claim because if we look at this thing very literally, nothing happened. Now compare that to the email back where the employee writes, no, the word happy is fine, and no one else here in my department gets this treatment. Okay, then HR doesn't say, let's look at that literally. They say about your email, let's look at that expansively. Oh, so you don't accept our authority. Oh, so you don't accept your supervisor's criticism. Oh, you're threatening, you're hostile, you're this. Like there we don't say, let's look at that. All the guy said is happy is fine and no one else gets this treatment. There we look at that expansively. This happens in bad marriage counseling. A spouse comes home. A spouse says, hey, Mr. or Miss Spouse, I had a great day at work today. Closed a deal. It's going to make us $94,000. And the other spouse said, oh, that's nice. Okay, now they go to marriage counseling. And the first spouse says, I didn't feel love. I didn't feel anything. Whatever. I knew of a marriage where I think the spouse was allowed to say, like, whatever he or she accomplished professionally was allowed to say it once. That was it. And then the other spouse basically said, I don't want to hear any more about this. This is showing off. That was all. That was it. So now the person complains at marriage counseling about the lack of love, the lack of appreciation, the whole thing. And what do you think the marriage counselor says? The bad marriage counselor, the one who's doing the conflict of interest. Well, what do you want? Hey, your spouse said that's good. Okay, meaning let's look at that literally. You got support. You got this. You got that. But when it comes to what you say, there we look at the slightest thing that could be taken in the wrong way, and we say, there we look at the language expansively. Finally, I think this one just absolutely blew me away when I heard this, is a lot of times when employees complain about what's going on in an office, they get a question like, who's responsible for your career anyway? It's not the company, it's you. It's, you say you're not getting promoted, you're not getting the best assignments, hey, you give us a project. stuff like that. Like it's your fault. Well, I heard this once where a marriage counselor asked just one of the spouses, Mr. or Miss So-and-so, you come here and you complain about something that's making you unhappy. Well, let me ask you this. Who is responsible for your own happiness? And the marriage counselor was like adamant. Like she drilled that into this person in a few different sessions and got the spouse to agree, yeah, I'm responsible for my own happiness, not my spouse. Well, couldn't you say that about anybody in marriage counseling? You could say it to anybody. I mean, if that's the logic, why have children? Why get married in the first place? Why have a career? Isn't happiness just dependent on you anyway? I mean, couldn't you say this to somebody in a North Korean gulag? It doesn't matter that you eat 4 kernels of rice per day or how you're treated. Happiness is dependent on you. And the answer in both cases is yes, that's right. Happiness is dependent on me. And part of happiness is one's environment and how that environment treats that person. If you're going through something like this at work, you know it. Get a lawyer. Have the lawyer explain your options. Is this situation permanent? Can you do something about it? We are here to help navigate you through these difficult employment periods.